Hi there, I'm Cody, and I built this giant Minecraft bee only using paper, no glue, and no tape. If you clicked on this video, you're probably here for all the details. Well, you came to the right place. In this video, we're going to be discussing the basics of building, then we'll go over how much paper we're going to need and how I calculated how much paper we're going to need. Then we'll move into the actual build process, and lastly, we'll end off with some fun numbers like how much did it cost and how many hours of my life did this take. So let's just dive right in. The first thing you need to know is that the entire bee is made up of cardstock paper cut up into little pieces like this. Every rectangle is cut to be 2 by 3.6 inches or 5.1 by 9.1 centimeters for my non-American friends. But realistically, you can use any size. It doesn't have to be this exactly. If you decide to go with a custom sized piece of paper, just keep in mind that the smaller edge of your rectangle is going to be how wide all of your cubes are. So for example, this is 2 inches and all of my cubes ended up being 2 by 2 by 2. So it's kind of a good way to gauge the size before you even build the bee. I have worked with smaller pieces before, like this Minecraft melon. For this one, I used 1 by 2 inch rectangles, but I will add the caveat that it is actually much harder to work with the smaller pieces. Now, one thing to note is the weight of your cardstock matters. The weight is basically how thick and how strong the cardstock is. You'll find the weight listed usually on the package of the cardstock you're buying, so it might say like 65 lb or 65 pounds. I recommend using 80 pounds or higher, but I did get away with one color being 65 pounds on my bee. So the lightest yellow, you can't really tell, but there's actually 2 yellows here. The lighter yellow is 65 pounds, but let me warn you, I built this bee on live stream, and every single live stream that I had to use that color, I complained because it was so hard to work with because it was super flimsy and super weak, and the cubes broke way easier. I don't know if I could have built this entire bee in 65-pound cardstock, so I'd recommend 80-pound or higher only. That's what makes it so sturdy. All right, now let's move into how do we turn this into a Minecraft bee? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It only takes one type of fold that you have to do over and over and over again. And I think the hardest step, honestly, is just assembling the cube. But once you have that down, it becomes the fastest step. So let's go through it together. You'll start by taking 2 pieces at a time, and you'll put them into a plus sign orientation like this. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to fold over these edges over each other. And you want them to be flush with the edge that you're folding over, like this. And notice how the 2 flaps I just folded aren't totally even. That is totally okay, it should still build just fine. Now we're gonna do this to the other piece as well. I'm just gonna flip it over and fold this, the same way I did to the other piece. Now we can take these apart. I like to do the next step because it makes it feel like it's more sturdy. I'll take the 2 pieces and push them together and just reinforce those folds we made just by pressing down on the folds again. And here's what we end up with. Now that we have 6 pieces, we can go ahead and build a cube. And for demonstration purposes, I'm using all different colors. Usually I would use all of the same color. I'm gonna start off with this maroon piece and this white piece. I'll have the white piece be the bottom of the cube and the maroon piece be one of the sides. I'll start off by just putting this flap underneath the white piece. The goal is that we want all the flaps to end up on the outside of the cube. So we have to keep that in mind every time we place something. As you can see, the maroon flap is on the outside. We're gonna hold this here. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna put the side inside of this flap. And then I'm gonna pull this flap to the outside of the maroon piece. Then I have this red on the outside and this white on the outside. Next up, we'll place this brown piece. I'm gonna start by sliding the flap underneath the white, and then we'll pull this red piece on the outside of the brown piece. Next, we'll add in yellow. So I'm going to put the yellow piece here, but I want these yellow flaps on the outside, so I'll pull them out like this. And we have one more piece, which is the green piece. I'm going to lift these 2 flaps to make room for my green piece, and we'll slide this in and make sure to pull these green flaps to the outside. And here is my cube. I like to sometimes just give it a good press to kind of squeeze down all those flaps one more time. It's pretty sturdy, and it's actually a great way to make like a homemade dice as well. As I said, this could be done with any rectangles, so I've actually done this with Pokemon cards, so here's an example. It's a little bit tougher to bend, but it's completely doable. And don't worry, these are just energy cards, so they're actually being used now. The next step is how to attach cubes together. Again, this process is pretty straightforward. It might just take a couple tries to get right, but let me show you how to do it. So if you want to put 2 sides together, like this, first of all, they need to be opposite orientations, so notice these flaps are vertical and these flaps are horizontal. Then what you're going to do is tuck the flaps of one into the flaps of the other. So see how that's tucked in right there? Repeat with the top flap as well. And sometimes I like to pull these out to make it a little bit easier. Tuck it in like that, and now they're together. The last thing we'll want to do is learn how to attach covers. You might notice that you don't see any flaps on the bee. That's because I added covers to it. So let me show you how. We're just going to take the same pieces we've been working with. Again, there's no other folds that we need to make these pieces. All you have to do to cover a side is to tuck the flaps of the cover into the flaps of the side you're trying to cover. And there we go, we have a nice cover. It now looks brown. So you might be thinking, can't I just use random colors and then just cover it up at the end? Kind of, but not really. If you look here, here are two brown covers on different colors. But notice that line in between the two. You can still see that color poking through. And if you have that on the entire bee, you're gonna see all of those lines at basically every intersection. So I can't recommend it. Anyways, that is the basics. That is how I built 99% of this bee. And it's how I built everything else I've had. The pickaxe, the sword, only needed this technique and that was good enough. We'll talk about the complications of the bee later. Let's move into how much paper are you gonna need for this project. To know exactly how many pieces I was going to need, I needed to make a map of the Minecraft bee from all sides. Luckily, a quick Google search led me to this Papercraft Minecraft bee, which showed the Minecraft bee from all angles. I didn't use the one I found on Google because it has a bunch of different colors and I wanted to simplify my colors a little bit. For example, I simplified the yellows to just be 3 yellows, a light yellow, a gold, and a dark sunflower gold. I did this so I wouldn't need like 50 shades of yellow. That sounds like an awful book title. Anyways, I made a spreadsheet that could help me calculate exactly how many pieces of paper I was going to need to buy and cut to get enough pieces for the bee. In order for my spreadsheet to work though, it needed 2 things. I needed to count the total number of cubes per color and how many covers I would need. I thought counting the cubes was going to be straightforward because of the map, but keep in mind that not every square correlates to 1 cube. For example, these 3 light yellow in the picture actually correspond to the 3 faces of 1 cube. So you had to be careful when counting edges and corners. The covers were also a bit tricky to count. The covers are basically the surface area of the bee. Any side of a cube that is exposed that we will see, we don't want the flaps out. And since we don't have a formula for the surface area of a Minecraft bee, it was just gonna be quicker to count it. So I built this spreadsheet which will now tell me exactly how much paper I need to buy. We're using the big pieces. Again, I don't recommend the small pieces. You focus on this one. This tells me how many pieces of paper I would need to buy for each color. You might notice there's 2 columns. That's because there's commonly 2 different sizes of cardstock paper. You have your typical 8.5 by 11, and you also have 12 by 12. This will tell you how many sheets you need depending on what size it is. So for light blue, I would need 2 pieces of 8.5 by 11. For 12 by 12, I would need just 1 piece. You obviously don't have to buy both of these, just pick one, whichever one works. So you might notice this rainbow square at the bottom. This is the inside covers. I originally wasn't going to cover the inside because you can't even see it, but it's not there for looks, it's there for structure. The covers make the cube stronger by not allowing the flaps to move around so much. If a flap gets lifted, that can break a cube. So I ended up covering it just with some rainbow paper. I do want to point out that in my map over here, you might notice that there is a blue and a purple. That is because you can't see the white very well, so I wanted to add some visibility. Notice over here, it says white is shown as this purple color, off-white is shown as this blue color, but ultimately in my paper buying section, I need to buy white and off-white. Although I'm gonna be honest, you probably could have just made them all white. I don't think anyone even sees the 2 tones of white. It probably would have been just fine. Now I'm gonna break down how I actually made the spreadsheet, and it's gonna get a little bit technical. So if you're not interested, you just wanted the numbers of the bee, feel free to skip ahead to the next section. I will not be offended. Take the numbers and run. But if you are interested, let's get into it. Let's start off with the calculations. This table requires that you find the number of cubes and the number of covers to tell you the total number of those small rectangular pieces that we need. Let's do blue as an example. Let me just clear it out. For blue, we're going to need 2 cubes for the 2 eyes. Notice that the cube pieces auto-populates with 12. That's because every cube is made up of 6 pieces. So it's just going to take the previous cell and multiply it by 6. The covers are any side of a cube that is exposed to the surface, one that you would see. For the eyes, this is also just 2. We only see those 2 squares in the front, which means in total, I need the 12 pieces from the cube and the 2 pieces from the covers to get a total of 14 pieces. Now, since I like to cut my own paper a lot of the time, I need to know how many pieces of paper that would equate to. The 2 standard sizes are 8.5 by 11 and 12 by 12 for cardstock paper. With the size rectangles that we're using, we can get 12 pieces out of an 8.5 by 11 and 18 pieces out of a 12 by 12. So for the light blue, if I needed 14, well, 1 piece of 8.5 by 11 wouldn't be enough because that's only 12. So we're gonna need 2 pieces. And then for 12 by 12, 18 would be plenty, so 1 piece would be enough. The way that this is set up to work is essentially it's going to take the total number of pieces, so in our case 14, and it's going to divide it by the number of pieces we can get out of that paper. We'll say 12 in this case for 8.5 by 11. If you do that math, that's gonna be 1.166, but I can't go to the store and buy 1.166 pieces of paper. And I can't just round it normally because 1.1 would round down to 1, which is not enough. That's where the ceiling function comes in. I'm basically telling it, hey, round up to the next whole number. So it'll take 1.166 and it'll round it up to a 2. That's how the spreadsheet will automatically calculate all of these numbers for you. This also gets us a lot of interesting numbers. So for example, we have the total number of cubes at 357, the total number of covers at 802, and the total number of pieces at 2,944. Now when I go to the store or shop online for cardstock, I can say, hey, of this dark gold color, I'm going to need either 36 pieces of 8.5 by 11 or 24 pieces of 12 by 12. And I can buy whatever's available. And if you want, here are some of the other spreadsheets that I have made for like Minecraft pickaxe, the axe, the hoe, the shovel. I haven't even made some of these yet, but if you'd like to, here you go. If there's enough interest, I might just make public copies of these spreadsheets so everyone has access to them. So let me know if you're interested. Anyways, let's move on to the next section. So let's talk about the actual build journey. Like, how did we put this thing together? Not just in theory, how do we put some cubes together, but like, how did it happen? Well, it was all done on live stream on twitch.tv/EasyAsTry, which is where I'll be pulling most of the clips from. The first thing we started with was building the face of the bee. This was pretty straightforward and you could just use the basic techniques. The hardest thing you have to do is attaching a cube to multiple other sides at the same time, which I don't think I've showed off yet. So let's look at it really quick. So let's say this is what you're starting with. This shape, and you want to attach this cube. Notice it attaches to this side and to this side. This can be difficult to just wiggle it around and make sure all the flaps get attached, so let me show you a trick. We'll start by attaching one side. We'll just tuck the flaps of one into the other. But notice these two aren't attached. The way I like to do this is I actually like to lift this flap right here. We're going to hold on to it because we're going to pick up the top piece. This may seem strange, but notice it gives us access to this flap that was originally trapped. I'm going to carefully push it in between the flaps of the other cube. And let's put this flap back. And notice this side is now attached, but the other side isn't. So we're going to do the same thing. I'll just repeat this process. I'm going to lift this flap up to get access to the top of this cube. Carefully pull it out and tuck the flap into those other two flaps. Put it back down, and now it is fully attached. I love this trick. It makes it a lot quicker to attach the cubes together. I think the face of the bee, the build time was only like an hour and a half. So if you wanted to, you could just make the face of the bee and use it as wall art. It would only take thumbtacks to hang up because it's so lightweight. You could even give it little antenna to give it some more dimension too. After I finished the face of the bee, I began work on the body, which I could have done one cube at a time, but I opted to make rows of the bee and attach them all at once. And be sure to check yourself along the way. At one point, I accidentally added an extra cube, which would have made the bee too long. Luckily, I caught myself before I got too far. The most advanced technique here was just attaching two rows that are side by side, because now you're attaching a lot of sides at the same time, but ultimately it's going to use that same trick. And you can see me doing that a lot in these video clips of building the bee. This was the main technique I was using for a while. You did have to attach the base, but that wasn't too hard. It was just one cube to one cube and then attach the rows together. This in itself wasn't too advanced. It was kind of the same technique as last time. One other thing that I did is I started to add the covers, and you might notice that it's in a cute rainbow pattern. Again, nobody's gonna see it, but these covers are really important as they add to the sturdiness of the bee. So I slowly added them as I was building it up. Now, as I was building, I was starting to notice the bee was actually getting kind of heavy, which was shocking. This is made of paper and it's hollow. But I'm gonna reveal the final weight at the end, but if you have a guess, feel free to guess early in the comments and just see how close you were. After building most of the sides of the bee, we started to run into some real challenges. Remember how earlier I said that we would need to flip it over and get to the other side to access those flaps? Well, as the bee's body was closing up, that became nearly impossible to do. 2 times where this became a real issue: when the corners would meet each other and when we were finishing the last few cubes of the bee, essentially closing the body. When the two sides were meeting, each cube I placed needed to attach to 3 sides at the same time, and it was difficult to access the other side. So I came up with a new method at this time, basically building a cube in the space rather than building it and placing it. For demonstration's sake, I built this. Let's say this is the last cube we're placing on the bee. Now, something to keep in mind is if this was the last piece of the bee, we wouldn't be able to touch this side. because that would be inside of the bee. It'd be closed off completely. So I'm not allowed to work with this side at all. I just have to work with this side. So let's show how those difficulties come in. I can't just place the cube in there. I won't be able to access any of the flaps on the other side. Our standard method isn't going to work. So I'm going to break apart our cube. What we're going to do is we're going to try to build the cube in the space. And I apologize ahead of time that this is going to be the hardest section to explain, because building the cube inside of this piece is not only hard to show, it's hard to do. See all these side flaps? I basically lifted those up carefully so I could insert this piece. Once the piece was in, I was going to try and pull these flaps back up and not push it too far. I did push a piece too far. There is a loose piece inside of the bee that I never got out. If you shake it, you can hear it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this in and try to slide it in under these yellow flaps right here. You can see right there how it slid in. Do the same with the top. Slide it so it's underneath that yellow flap back there. We have access to this side, so we can lift this flap and cover it, lift this flap and cover it. Do the same with the other side. Now let's add the bottom piece, which this one is a little bit tricky. The flap needs to go behind this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the flap so it doesn't pop up until we get it underneath. I'm going to press down to get it underneath. It'll go through. Let the flap go, and then you'll see it pop up like this, and you can pull it back in. That's how you get that piece in. We'll do the same with the other side. So I'm going to flip it upside down, slide it in, hold it down until it goes through, pop, pull it back. Now we have one more piece, which is the front. Just going to go right here and make sure to tuck it in these flaps as you go. And that's how you build a cube when you don't have access to the other side. It is awful. It is terrible. My recommendation, when you are building the bee, plan out for your last set of cubes to be like an edge or something, because at least in the edge you have access to the air versus this piece right here, which is surrounded on almost every side, and then one of the sides you can't even get to because it's inside the bee. So the edges are honestly the best place to end if you can. I don't know if it avoids this issue completely, but it's a theory. That was the hardest technique because we didn't have access to all sides. That being said, building a cube in a space rather than building the cube and putting it in the space is a very good technique that we actually ended up using for the wings. I'm sorry if this seems very tricky. It is so hard to explain exactly what I did, but I hope that the footage serves you well. Now that the main body was done, it was time to attach the wings, the antenna, the legs, and the stinger. Now the antenna, the legs, and the stinger were super easy. Just built them, added covers, stuck it on. Just like attaching two cubes. No big deal. The issue arose with the wings. So for the wings, what happened was I built the entire wing and then I was going to attach it as one big piece. But the wing, as you can see, attaches to the bee at many places. Many cubes touch the bee body. So there was no way I was going to be able to attach all of these cubes simultaneously. So what I did instead is I broke off the piece of the wing that hangs off the bee, like this. Then what I did is I attached these one cube at a time. So I broke them all apart and built one cube, one cube, one cube, one cube, until I had all of these pieces that touched the body attached. Then I took the other part of the wing that hangs off the bee and I attached it at these three pieces where they're supposed to attach. Don't go through the process of building the entire wing and trying to attach it. It's not going to work. Now I will say that someone on TikTok tagged me saying that they had also made the bee, but the way they made the wings was genius. And I just wanted to share it really quick. Look at that. Like, they just actually used pieces of paper, which makes sense because in the game, Minecraft bee wings are not three-dimensional, they are flat. So if you want an easy hack with the wings, there you go. But I think you do have to use some glue or tape for that one. Now, when I was attaching these cubes on top of the bee, I will say that I did use the building a cube in place technique a few times. It was easier because I had access to all the sides, and I used that method a couple of times for ones that were attaching to 3 or more sides. When I finished the wings, I added the covers, and that was it. After 8 live streams, it was finally over, and I had my adorable bee that I had been envisioning forever. I love the results. I think it came out so cute. I'm not gonna lie, The antennas fall off sometimes because the paper got a little bit ripped when I was putting them on, but it's still adorable. It's still fine. His name is Bert, the inside bee, named after a bee on my Minecraft server that lived in the house. If anyone does decide to take on the challenge of building this bee, here's a few different angles of the bee for your reference. Now it's time to answer some questions. I think my most pressing question is, how long did it take? How many hours of my life are gone because of this bee? So we're gonna calculate how long it should have taken, because I didn't do everything on live stream, which would have been the perfect timer. I did mostly building and assembly, but a lot of the folding and the cutting happened off stream. So we're gonna calculate how long it should have taken to build this bee. Let's start with the cutting. So we needed to cut 2,944 pieces, have enough for this bee. It took me about 5 minutes and 57 seconds to cut 72 pieces, meaning it took about 5 seconds per piece. Apply that by our 2,944 pieces, and we end up with about 245 minutes, or about 4.1 hours. Just for cutting. Now for a confession. I did not cut all the paper myself. I found a company that I could buy paper from and then pay them a couple extra dollars and they would cut the paper for me. This saved me a lot of time. I didn't get all of my colors there, but I did get a lot of them there, so it saved me at least a couple hours on cutting. Now I don't gatekeep. The company is called cutcardstock.com. They're not a sponsor, but I wish they were. Moving on to the folding process, this number might be shocking. Similar to cutting, I needed to fold the same amount of paper, so the 2,944 pieces. It took me 9 minutes and 34 seconds to fold 72 pieces, which is almost 8 seconds per piece, which for all those pieces we had to fold would give us a time of about 6.5 hours of folding. It's time for another confession. Around the end of the bee project, I did have some of my friends help me fold paper. I showed them the technique. They started folding. They helped me out a lot. They saved me at least 2 hours. I'm gonna say 2 hours. That time was probably saved by my friends. So thank you, friends. You know who you are. For the cube construction, we needed to make 357 cubes total. I timed myself building 8 cubes and took the average time. On average, it took about 15.75 seconds to build 1 cube. This means our 357 cubes give us a time of 94 minutes, or about an hour and a half. So not too bad. That was actually not a lot of time. The last thing we needed was the construction time, which was putting the cubes together, adding the covers. This was harder to calculate because of difficulties I ran into while building. So I just went through my live streams and tried to cut out the time I was folding or building cubes. And it seemed like we put about 22 hours into building time on live stream. But I could easily see this going longer if you're newer and you're not quite used to building like this. So be warned. All right, so the total estimated build time, we'll pretend that I cut the paper myself and that I don't have friends, was 34 hours. 34 hours. I honestly thought it was longer, but that kind of makes sense. I built it over the period of like 10 weeks. I only had a few hours each weekend to work on it, so it makes sense that it felt so long to me. But still, 34 hours, like that's almost a full work week. So if you do plan on taking on this massive project, just understand what you're getting yourself into. It is a lot of time. Let's talk about costs. How much did this actually cost to make? Is it cheap? It's all paper, right? It's a lot of paper. From cut cardstock, I spent about $93.50. So we'll just call it 94. For Michael's, I spent $28. And this was mostly on sunflower gold paper and some rainbow paper. I don't think I spent any money anywhere else outside of that for this project, so it looks like our total is about $122. $122 and 34 hours of my life. Was it worth it? Yes. Now that we know how much money and time the bee cost, let's reveal how much it weighs. Drum roll, please. The bee weighed 6.4 pounds, or 2.9 kilograms for my non-United States friends. Were you close with your guess? Let me know. Can I recommend this as a DIY? No. I don't think for most people this is something that they would want to put 34 hours into, but hopefully this gives you the information to know what you're getting into. I didn't want to be dishonest and make it seem like, oh, it's super easy, everyone can do it, it's so fast. It's not. It costs a lot of money, which is a huge barrier. My other Minecraft DIYs, on the other hand, like the sword and the pickaxe, 100% I can recommend those, because I think I built the pickaxe in like 2 hours, 3 hours maybe. It was very quick and it doesn't take that much paper. The sword took a little longer, but still didn't use that much paper either. They were much easier and they don't involve any of the difficult techniques. That being said, they're definitely not as sturdy as the bee, because the bee has this like 3D form, but they make great wall art. So if you want a giant pickaxe or a giant sword for your wall, there you go. Now that we've covered everything about the bee, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video. What's crazy is a week ago, we were at like 4,000 subscribers on YouTube, and as of recording this video, I just broke 20,000. That's insane to me. So thank you guys so much for your support. I also want to let you know, if you're new here, I don't just do paper paper crafts, I do other stuff as well, like making video game themed boba and pasta and pastries and stuff like that. So don't be surprised if you see some cooking videos on the way. I'm terrible at saying goodbye because I love to ramble. I'm gonna cut myself off. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.